When I was 8 years old, I started working in my father's drugstore on the west side of Cleveland, and it was very formative during my childhood. I grew up in that store and had the opportunity to meet a diverse amount of people, customers that would come in as well as the employees. And I got an inside look and an early start, if you will, to how people interact with each other, how they don't interact with each other, what gets rewarded, what doesn't get rewarded, those types of things. So kind of an introduction into politics and dynamics and things of that nature within the business. And so today I'm going to share with you my learnings since that time, my professional career, and working with my clients, both as an internal consultant as well as an external consultant, and help you understand what office politics actually means for you, as well as strategies for you to make sense of it all, right? So how to decode what it is you're seeing or maybe not seeing, and the games that people play to get what they want in organizations. So whether you are a small business, whether you are a nonprofit, whether you're a corporate, feel free to put in the chat as well what type of business you are, and that'll help me know who's in the room. But it applies regardless of the type of organization. We'll explore the implications of working from home, right? During the last 2 years of COVID, a big shift. So many people are working from home that never did before. How does that play into office politics? What does it look like when many people, sometimes almost everyone in some organizations, is working from home? And lastly, how to assess the dynamics of your organization, and what are some key strategies that you can use to start making sense and getting some traction. You can put this in the chat, but when you hear the term office politics, like, what's your gut reaction? What's your first reaction? Go ahead and put your response in the chat. So it looks like overwhelmingly negative. All right, that is pretty typical, right? Conflict. Yeah, thanks, Pat. Says conflict. Yeah, so there's a lot of negatives with the politics that we associate. And so let's break it down a little bit. So we all have a similar understanding. We know what are politics, right? Politics are really kind of informal. They're an unwritten code, and often behind the scenes, right? So these are things that are invisible to us, where someone or groups of people try to sell their ideas or influence, increase their power. And at the end of the day, it's politics evolve in order to get our personal objectives met without regard necessarily for the rest of the team or the rest of the organization, or if it's a small business, how it impacts the small business. And so there's many definitions of politics. One of the key things here, though, is really putting self-interests above group interests. And what are the dynamics that take place when that happens in order to try to get what you want? I don't know how many of you used to watch or Survivor at all, but if you might remember Richard Hatch from one of the early seasons, who really started getting people going with the dynamics by creating alliances in order to win, that whole competition. So 2/3 of workers say that participating in office politics is necessary to get ahead in a recent poll by Robert Half. That's a lot. Now, most of my clients, I will tell you, say, I am not going to kiss up to my boss. I am not going to, compromise my professionalism, my integrity to play these games, right? And so we reach this kind of dilemma. What do we do, right? Because the belief is that we need to, in some ways, sell out in order to get ahead, and that creates a lot of challenges for us. So what does it look like at the ground level? Well, gossip and rumors take up almost half of what we consider office politics. And again, in the workplace, it might be the hallways, it might be, it could be through email and other means. For remote work, it may look a little differently in terms of the percentages. But flattering the boss, right? That's almost a third of the activities in a recent study. Taking credit for others' work. So if you've ever had a boss or a peer claim to have done something that you actually put in the work for, right? And sabotaging, when it gets really extreme, sabotaging others' projects, making other people look bad, throwing them under the bus, right? Pulling the carpet from underneath them, right? Those types of things that we often hear and experience. So I'd like you to take a moment to reflect. For you, if you were to be able to, a goal that you have for yourself or something you're trying to resolve, what's a challenging situation or person at work that you wish to influence? Go ahead and put in the chat, and you don't need to use any names. We don't need names. But what's a challenging situation or person at work that you wish to influence, that you wish would change? Something that might be frustrating you, or it might just be a goal in general. This will serve as a backbone for the rest of the presentation. So as I'm talking about the organizational politics and dynamics, you can take what I'm sharing and what we're discussing collectively and bring that back to your situation. How might it apply to your situation? So take a moment to really try to come up with something that's going to be meaningful for you, that if you're able to solve that issue or turn the tide on it, it would make a meaningful difference in your day-to-day work. Okay, so let's see. Wendy says, be more responsive. Old school mentality of supervisors. Thank you, Nora. A. Ruiz says passive aggressive communication. Anyone else experience that? Don, encouraging the consideration of others. Okay, anything else? Decreasing conflict among staff. Yeah, it can get pretty toxic, right? Keeping it, yeah, having someone keep an open mind. Yeah, so these are an employee who loves to disagree. Do you have anyone kind of stirring the pot? Yeah, so some people, thanks, Margie. Yeah, so some people surprisingly derive a lot of energy and joy out of stirring the pot, right? It doesn't make sense to most of us. Some enjoy do that, or seem to enjoy doing that. Again, we have our perceptions. So what are the common political games? So Henry Mintzberg is a researcher who's been studying this for a long time, or had been at the time. And he came up with 13 common political games that people play at work. So I'm going to just briefly go through these. And as I am, just make a mental note or jot down, like, which ones have you seen or experienced? And for full accountability, which ones have you been guilty of? What have you used yourself, right? Because if we're going to create some change, we do need to take stock, right? It starts with us, right? And so, have that in mind here. And for your challenging situation or challenging person, again, make a note of, oh yeah, that's the game they're playing, right? They're empire building, or they're they're lording, or whatever it is. So I'm going to go ahead and walk us through very briefly. And as I am, feel free to chime in the chat saying, yep, I've seen that, or I have that situation. Feel free to engage in that way. All right, so the insurgency and counterinsurgency. So this is actually two different ones. I put them together. Insurgency is generally something that is initiated by frontline staff that generally don't have a lot of power, and they're resisting authority, right? That's the general sense. Is they might not like the rules, they might not like how they're treated, and they're resisting in some way, right? They're resisting like legitimized systems and policies and whatnot. That could take the form in some cases of well, in some extremes, a strike, or more subtle extremes, just reducing productivity, right? All agreeing to just slow down, do a work slowdown or something like that. So there's different ways that it manifests. And the counterinsurgency is usually something initiated by like line managers that team up, across different departments to squash the efforts of the frontline efforts. So sometimes you'll see that. I noticed you have a topic coming up on Starbucks coming up, right? And Starbucks recently announced they're closing one of their stores that's unionizing, I believe, if I'm correct. And so that might be something considered. I don't know if it is in reality. I don't have the details, but it might be considered a counterinsurgency. Is that a tactic, or is it something else? So join CalWorks Safety and HR for that. That's coming up. All right, so empire building. That is what we, many of us are commonly aware of, where someone just tries to increase their power by increasing the amount of people that report to them, right? So building out that kingdom with the amount of people and the type of people that report up to you. So that's kind of a strategy to increase someone's influence by doing it in that way. Now, another way that some people try to increase their power, again, to get what they want, increase the influence, is through alliances, right? Alliances might happen at a middle manager or frontline manager level, or even individual contributors, where you're reaching out to people within the team, outside the team, that are like-minded, right? Trying to build that coalition that believe in the way you do in order to influence some type of change or decision. So that is alliance building. Sponsorship. So sponsorship can take different forms. Sometimes it's a legitimate sponsorship, and sometimes it's called a feigned sponsorship. Sponsorship is when you are using someone else's name that has maybe some legitimate authority, or there's someone that's well respected, maybe they're higher up in the organization, and you're maybe name dropping, you're dropping their name saying, so-and-so really wanted me to do this, or like I'm doing this on the authority of so-and-so, right? And that's a way to increase your power or get someone to listen to you, even if you're just a frontline level contributor to the organization. Or it may be someone that really doesn't even know anything about you or whatever, but you might say, so-and-so wouldn't like this, or so-and-so would want this, right? Again, you're kind of drawing your influence from somebody else's legitimate influence and power. So that's a couple of faces of sponsorship. Some people try to increase through budgeting, right? By having resources. That's their way of doing it. So they might not have a lot of people. They might not have a lot of relationships or friendships or anything like that, but they have money, or maybe they're under budget and other departments are over budget and they need it. And so there's power in that, right? There's sometimes negotiations between departments, right? So sometimes budgeting has that, or if you control the purse strings, right? So there's power in that too for the organization. Expertise. So you might not have any formal leadership role or anything of that nature, but if you have a specialized expertise, or you lead people to believe that you have a specialized expertise that they need and they don't have themselves, again, that the saying that knowledge is power, right? That's applicable here. And so sometimes we'll let the games people play, we'll even let people believe that we know more than we actually do, because we feel it gives us power, or sometimes we literally do. I had a client once a director who had a unique set of skills, and she had it in 3 different areas, like in regulatory and law, just 3 different areas of the organization. And no one else, she knew no one else in the organization had that. And the VPs knew that too. And so she had the organization by the you-know-what when she demanded to be promoted to become a VP. And I was brought in at that point to try to, resolve the issue. And again, but that's how some people try to exert their power in that way. Lording. I'm going to kind of scroll through these here. What's lording? Lording is, again, it's a close cousin to empire building or something like that. But lording is, in many cases, where you can have control over processes or procedures. So perhaps anyone that needs to hire someone new needs to go through your department, or anyone that needs to see so-and-so, maybe you're a gatekeeper, needs to go through you. So you might make someone jump through hoops in order to get what you want. Or if you've experienced that, others making you jump through hoops and these nonsensical steps, bureaucracy, right, in order to get what you want. Again, that's a way for them, even though they don't have any hierarchical power, they have a lot of power there, even over senior executives, right? Just because they control a process, or they're accountable for a policy or something like that that affects others. Line versus staff. That's a common, just employees versus management. Rival camps. Again, that's closely related to alliances, but the essence of rival camps is more of a win-lose situation, right? You're trying to outdo each other, and it's kind of a zero-sum game. Strategic candidates. Strategic candidates are really about putting someone forward, maybe that will be beneficial to what you believe or what your side believes. So you might kind of put forward those that ultimately at the end of the day could be advantageous to you or your peers. And sometimes it's in a stealthy way, right? It's not, typically it is in a stealthy way. Whistleblowing. Again, this oftentimes is someone that's lower in the organization, that's, feels they don't have other strategies. Maybe they've hit a wall, they've been trying to blow the whistle. CalWorks Safety and HR, does a lot of investigations and stuff like that. Maybe somebody doesn't have that power, so they blow the whistle, right? So although it's not limited to the front line or someone like that. Uber recently, right? There was a former VP, I believe, or maybe C-level executive that just blew the whistle on some behavior about their culture back in pre-2018, before the new guard came in. So and then the Young Turks is usually where you have the next generation of leaders just itching, right, to get into those higher level positions. Maybe they're waiting for the senior leaders to retire, or the owner to retire, if it's a small business, that type of thing. And so they may try to test the senior leaders. Some cases they might try to set them up or make them look bad to get them out of the organization in order to ascend. You see this all over. You see it even in Washington, D.C., right? You have in both parties, you have generations of kind of younger leaders trying to exert their influence. And so again, it takes place in any kind of organization oftentimes. Let me do a quick time check here. Okay. So let's distill this down here. We have a choice. So let's say we know these games, right? And feel free to put in the chat which ones of those that resonated with you, like, yeah, I've seen that, I'm experiencing that. We have a choice, right? We can cooperate or not cooperate, which we call defecting, right? So cooperating is acting in a way that we're trying to achieve both of our interests. Defecting is acting in a way where we're just all about ourselves, our own self-interests that we're putting above. So in the upper left, if we both cooperate, it's a win-win, right? If we both choose not to, it's a lose-lose in the lower right, where we both lose if we don't cooperate. And then if one of us cooperates and the other doesn't, then there's a winner and there's a loser, right? It's kind of one of those situations. So let's take a look at what this may look like. Let's say that you have just completed a project, right? It's been very successful, and there was a team there, and let's say that you are person A, and you've got someone else that was perhaps the co-lead or your partner on it. And if both of you basically say, yeah, Joe did really great. I know I was the leader, but he did a ton of the work. And in turn, Joe says that you did a lot, right? So you both get a bonus, right? So win-win, right? You're sharing the credit for that. Okay, well, what happens now if one says, well, Joe really didn't do a whole lot at all. I did all the work. Thrown under the bus, right? And Joe is of the nature where, he's saying the same thing about you. So what happens is it becomes more of a lose-lose. So now, management's like, well, I don't know who to believe here, but it was a successful project, so we're just going to split it. You get $1,500 bonus for each of you. So again, they lose. It's a suboptimal solution. So if both people choose not to cooperate, it's a suboptimal solution. Now, with the other option is, and it's not always necessarily the most optimal to cooperate either, because if you claim all the credit and the other person doesn't, guess what? You get more. You get the whole pot, right? You get more there. So the games come in, the dynamics come in is we don't know how someone else is going to react necessarily, depending on how well we know them. If we know someone that's like a doormat and they're always going to cooperate and they're never going to throw anyone else under the bus, and we are kind of out for our own interest, then we might go for that strategy of defecting and saying, hey, I did all the work, right? Because we know they're not going to say anything, or we have something on them, that will minimize the risk of them saying anything. So it's a guessing game. It becomes a guessing game. And that's where you start to see some of these toxic dynamics that come in. And so what are some of those? So what are some of the negative aspects of politics? So all of you had said negative. What are the negative aspects of politics? Go ahead and put in the chat. Like, what are the repercussions of politics in the workplace? Brent says infighting, decreased productivity. Yeah, wasted time, Don says, jealousy, creating divisions, right? Decrease in teamwork. Thank you, Kayla. Low morale, right? So there's some tangible things that happen here. Hurt feelings, right? And that can last. A lot of times people have long memories, right? That can last for decades, particularly in organizations where people work there for a long time. Yeah, absolutely. So you mentioned a lot of them, right? Another thing is sets a bad example, right? What's the behavior you want? So you kind of hit the nail on the head with all of these. Now, what if there were some positive aspects? Would you believe me? Are there positive aspects of politics? Let me share some with you. Well, it could be to influence change, right? Positive aspect could be maybe the organization is struggling a bit and they're stuck in their ways. Maybe the organization's been around and you're trying to influence some change in the organization. Well, maybe forming some alliances and things like that to affect positive change that will make things better, the survival of the organization, right? Think about COVID the last 2 years, right? Did you see some people who just wanted to continue doing business as usual versus others saying, hello, the reality is totally different. We need to change, right? Restaurants, needed to shift on a dime, right? And do more takeout and delivery, things like that. So again, part of it's like, what's the reality and what are you trying to accomplish? You can use politics to actually create more inclusiveness and belonging, right? So maybe you tap someone who at the higher part of the organization who believes the way you do, like a sponsor and a senior executive, in order to create some change in the organization. I mean, a lot of organizations are pursuing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, or in the nonprofit sector, called JEDI, right? Justice, equity, diversity, inclusion. So again, it can be something that's positive. It can also advance your career. Again, not necessarily at the expense of your integrity, but if it's maybe making yourself more visible in the organization or making your accomplishments more visible, things of that nature, again, that can be a positive aspect for people knowing who you are. It can put a stop to unwanted behavior. Again, sometimes if someone's just a bull in a china shop, or they continue to take credit for things that don't belong to them, sometimes, maybe going a level above them, escalating, so that someone with authority that they will listen to can put a stop to it, right? So sometimes politics can have some positive things, and it can increase performance, right? Look at peer pressure. You have someone that's not pulling their weight on a team, right? A little peer pressure, which is a form of politics, can increase that person's performance, right? Saying, come on, get with it here. All right. So that is kind of politics. And then we have this other dimension. They take place in the context, the canvas of culture. So politics in and of themselves, and those different 13 strategies that people commonly use, they may or not be as effective in some organizations as others, because it depends on the culture, the norms of the organization. So what is culture? One of my mentors, gurus, is Edgar Schein. He just describes culture as a pattern of learned assumptions that are shared and maintained by a group. That's an important aspect of it, maintained by a group. Another definition by, famous source here is Merriam-Webster, right? Characteristic features of just everyday existence, right? Kind of the way of life. And another one is just the way we do things around here, right? So again, if you're an like a cultural anthropologist, and that's why I want to invite you to adopt that hat, right? As we move forward here, is to be that cultural anthropologist or be that detective, that Columbo, to really kind of assess what is the culture, what are the larger patterns at play here, so that you can strategically and effectively respond to the situation or mitigate a situation that you want to stop. management guru Peter Drucker is known for saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So you can know everything about politics, but if you're not familiar with the culture, what's accepted in the culture, what offends people, what's valued or not valued, then you might hit several brick walls. So understanding the culture of your organization or your customers, right? So some of you may be, is anyone here like part of a small business, like a small family-run business? Understanding your vendors or your customers' culture can be really helpful for you to have influence and to negotiate and to get what you need, right? And so by paying attention, it will increase your power and your influence. So put in the chat box here, answer this question. I'm most frustrated by people who, okay. I'll let you read that. Go ahead and put in the chat box, which one are you most frustrated by? Okay. I'm seeing like C and E seem to be, down says agreeing in public and then doing something else privately. Yep, B. Yeah. So it can be really frustrating for sure. And so one of the key things is really to be able to see what's going on. And so let's bring it home here, right? So again, think of your challenging situation, challenging person. And let's look at how we can assess, right? So there's 4 keys that I'm going to focus on for how you can really pick apart what's going on and understand what's going on and respond to it, right? So artifacts, right? Those are physical things we want to look for. Behaviors, right? Customs or rituals, and power. And we're going to go ahead and take these one by one. So artifacts are physical manifestations of a culture, right? And so in the workplace, what's that look like, right? It might be you walk into someone's office, what do you see? Do you see that they have like a lot of plaques or degrees on the wall? Do they have trophies from sports or things, awards, that they've won in the business? Do they have a lot of family photos, right? Things of that nature, pictures of their kids. What kind of furniture do they have, right? Do they have, and how is it arranged, right? Do they have like a big desk and whoever comes in to visit needs to sit, on the other side of the desk? Or do they have like a round table, for example, where, they'll meet with people around the table? It connotes different things, right? One is more formal, a little bit more traditional, hierarchical, or, and the, different type of power. The other is kind of more collaborative, right? I worked in this one organization when I was in grad school. They literally had, for different levels of leaders, they had different rules. Like you could have this size office, or an office with a door or not a door, or you could have this type of table or this not, depending on your hierarchy, including parking spaces, right? So those that, were higher up had parking spaces close to the building. Those that were not had to walk about a mile to get to the main building. So again, look at the physical layout as well. Decorations, right? Is it austere? Is it like very, professional, or is there some color and creativity and decorations and things of that, right? That can tell you a lot about the personality of the individual as well as the organization. When you walk into the lobby of an organization, of the business, being aware of, okay, do they have like the mission posted there? Do they have a security guard or not have a security guard? So all of these things that you observe, the floors, all these polished marble floors, Or is it more of a comfortable, homey kind of look with carpeting and comfortable couches, right? Pay attention to those things. And then the resources that are available, looking for clues to see, what kind of, whether the individual or organization, and just seeing kind of what's available, what can you physically see. And so the strategy going back is really just to observe those clues. So now second strategy is to observe behaviors. Okay, what are the patterns of behavior in the group, right? So what are the interpersonal norms? The norms are basically, interpersonal norms are how we treat each other at work and what's accepted, what's not accepted. For example, do team members typically show up late to meetings? Is that accepted to be 5-10 minutes late? Or are people very punctual? Like if you're not punctual, you're going to get the cold stares, right? Or turning in projects. Is it okay to turn in projects late, or does that need to be punctual, right? What are the norms? Or responding to people's emails or calls, right? Are people selective responders, or is it expected that everyone responds or in a certain amount of time? So all of these things you're going to pay attention to, how we communicate with each other, the language that's used as well, right? Language in terms of level of professionalism, language in terms of maybe putting someone down or building someone up, right? That type of language, minimizing type of language where you're kind of minimizing someone or their contributions versus recognizing people. Like, so what's the norm that you see? What's the pattern that you see in the group or individual? Conflict. How is conflict handled? Is it swept under the rug typically? Or do people just point fingers? Is it the blame game? Or is it whoever speaks the loudest wins? So observe. Or is it more of a collaborative? We both sit down and we address things directly, one-on-one. Or is it that we never tell the person we have an issue with, we tell everybody else, right? And we have the rumors and gossip and stuff like that. So we pay attention to those patterns. Performance, is it an organization that expects high performance, like an Amazon, right? Again, they're like to the extreme. They want people to be obsessed with performance, obsessed with the customer experience. Or is it okay to you have underperformers and other people just make up for it, right? And it's just tolerated. So how is that looked at? Cohesion, right? Do people laugh together? Do they go out together for like happy hours? Do they seem to want to be in each other's presence or company, or not? Do they just prefer to dial in virtually now and they never show up in person, right? So they kind of avoid each other. So look at those patterns. Strategy 3, observe the traditions and rituals. So if I'm the anthropologist, I'm going to look at, if I'm in some country, whatever, like what do they celebrate? What are the dances that take place? What kind of music do they create or listen to, right? In the workplace, same thing, right? What are people's common assumptions how things get done or work? What's the mission, vision, goals of the organization or the team, right? So just that gives you clues onto what is valued and what the priorities are and what's not. And that has ripple effects on behavior. It has ripple effects on the other dimensions of the dynamics, right? Including the physical things, right? Are birthdays celebrated, or do they just, people have a birthday and it just passes by? Some people might just send a text, happy birthday, or just everybody on the team get together and go out to lunch and celebrate, right? I had a client one time, it was a small team of 4 or 5. One team member, the team had a culture generally of going out to lunch. And there was one team member that said, no, I won't go to lunch for this person's birthday because I don't like that restaurant. And that was tolerated, right? So again, the culture is, you have to look at that, right? What does that do to the organization and the cohesion in a group if something like that is tolerated? A recognition reward. So what gets rewarded? Is tenure rewarded, right? Just longevity? Or is it performance that's rewarded? Or is it the individual that builds strong relationships and performs, right? What gets recognized, what gets called out and rewarded? Conversely, what gets punished? What gets those cold stares, or what gets the write-ups, right? So looking at that, the stories that people tell, like what are the urban legends? What's the founder story? Like what are the stories that people repeat time over time? Again, that gives you clues. And as well as the games, right? Do people have fun together? Do they not? Like how do people have fun together? Last strategy, observing kind of the structure. This is like the org chart type stuff. So again, is it a traditional hierarchical organization, or is it a relatively flat organization? That can give you clues on how to get things done, right? If it's a traditional hierarchy, there's probably more bureaucracy. It's probably not okay to go above your boss to your boss's boss to ask for something or get something done, probably frowned upon. Whereas if it's a flat organization, meaning there might only be 3 layers of the organization, it might be perfectly okay to talk to anyone about anything, and it's not a negative thing, right? So looking at things like that, right? Leadership. What's the typical leadership style in the organization? Is it more of a top-down, or is it more, do they tend to empower people? Who are the influencers? Now, the influencers aren't necessarily in, senior manager or vice president roles. The influencers can be an admin assistant. It could be anyone. It could be the janitor, right? So looking around to see who has influence, who talks to who. So if you were to kind of imagine the communication flow, where does most of the communication flow through, right? And so looking to see who are the influencers in the organization, because that can inform you of maybe that's how I could get things done, by getting to know these influencers, right? Affiliations. So what are the groups that people tend to join, right? Both formally and informally, right? So it might be trade organizations, professional trade organizations, or it might be councils within the organization, the diversity council or the green team, or in events, or a golf club, right? So looking at that, team roles, decision making, how are resources allocated, right? Is it something that's kind of an objective process and there's an established process, or is it resources are allocated by who gets on the side of the finance director, right? Or the CEO or whatever? What policies and procedures are in place? Do they encourage teamwork, or do they discourage it? I worked with a client once that wanted to do a change to have more teamwork. And what they ran up against was a union policy that said, no, you can't do that. That's not your job. That's our job to do that, right? So there were policies in place, or a contract in this case, that actually discouraged teamwork. So we actually had to renegotiate the union contract, to shift the culture of the organization. All right, so I'm going to give you a couple scenarios here. And so again, I'm going to give you kind of a little bit of a quiz, how you would approach some scenario, how you would approach each of these leaders if you were on that team. So here are the facts. So Jenny is someone that you walk in, you observe that, you're on the floor of the team. Maybe it's a 15-person team, and you see that all the cubicles are decorated. There's a lot of color. There's a lot of squishies or Dilbert things. There's cartoons. There's all kinds of stuff. You see that everyone's, got kind of an open space. Office doors where those offices are open. There's a snack table that anyone can contribute to and take from. You look at the behaviors. Well, you hear a lot of laughter even before you enter the door to the department, right? You see that people are paired up and talking to each other in their cubicles and in the open space, right? So, and that people just go and they go talk to the boss or whatever. It's very informal, right? Customs, birthdays celebrated. There's more of a how can we do this when people give a new idea that might be not the norm for the team. I say, well, how might we make that happen? That abundance mindset versus a naysaying. And then if someone makes a mistake, how is that treated? That, oh, this team gives the benefit of the doubt, right? There's a lot of trust here. Like, oh, we all make mistakes, and they, again, build people up and help them, right? Jenny's a visionary leader, collaborative, empowered team, right? So let's say that's the culture you observe with Jenny versus Sarah. You go in and you notice that there's no decorations at all. There's no pictures in people's cubes. There's no ornamentation whatsoever. There's staplers and copy machines or whatever. People are dressed very formally. Everyone seems to be keeping to themselves. They close the doors. They speak in hushed tones. It's like eerily quiet, right? So you're observing all this. Birthdays, they might have a get together, but not everyone participates in that. There's more of that scarcity mindset. People generally are afraid to speak up. And if someone makes a mistake, watch out. You're going to have Sarah on your case there, and as well as others. And it just becomes intolerable. And then the power, again, Sarah's visionary too, but has a more directive style of leadership, likes things done her way, and is more prescriptive in how things get done versus Jenny, who empowers the team to kind of figure that out and collaborate. And so the team is in a state of restriction and kind of watching their step, walking on eggshells. So here's the scenario. If you were looking to ask for a raise, let's say, in Jenny's organization, how might it be different than how you would ask in Sarah's organization, asking for a raise? You can put that in the chat. Think about that. If you wanted to get a proposal approved, like you wanted to pitch a new idea or a proposal, right? Maybe you're trying to get another employee if you're a manager, or maybe you're trying to get a new assignment. How would that differ between Jenny and Sarah? Right? Most likely you're going to go about it in a different way because the culture is different, the norms are different, all of that. All right. We've got about 5 minutes left here, or a little less than that. I'm going to wrap up here. So what are your biggest challenges with the remote work? We're going to shift gears a little bit into remote work. What are your biggest challenges with the remote work? And while we're waiting for that, Wendy says with Jenny, perhaps during a weekly meeting, kind of bring something up with Sarah, maybe a formal annual review. And then Don says with Jenny, just bounce ideas off, kind of get her in a brainstorm. And with Sarah, he would kind of just dot the I's, cross the T's, make sure everything's in order and well researched, right? So again, it changes people's behavior by the culture and the games. So Wendy says, not getting to work side by side with your peers, right? Yes, that's a big change. A lot of my clients, a lot of my managers say it's really hard because they feel like that's a tool that they're losing. In fact, I have one client who's really engaging in person, but notorious on screen. He's got the bored face. And people think he's totally disengaged when he's on a Zoom call. And he's received this feedback, and I worked with him on this. Because again, it's another medium. It doesn't always translate. But office politics still take place in the remote. Now, the thing is you're not visible. So there's a lot of more room for misunderstandings when everything's remote. Some of you might have been working remote pre-COVID, and you kind of learned some strategies that we're going to talk about in a moment, feel free to share your strategies. But all these things here, in terms of drawbacks, it's harder to establish relationships when you're remote, particularly if you start as a new employee. I had a client at Spotify, for example, a new manager that came in completely remote. It was so hard for this client to just get acclimated because it was all remote. And that's a common theme. So how do you onboard people when you're in a remote situation, if you're in a position? Very important to take that into account. Nora says availability, return calls take too long. Yeah, you can't just walk over to someone's office or meet them in the hallway, right? So one of the things we have to do is be more intentional. One of the opportunities though is that we're not walking down the hallway with that file folder, that's empty, but it makes us look like we're doing something. So there's a little bit more emphasis on delivery, delivering stuff more on work than impressions. So that's an opportunity in the remote environment. But you can also show the more personal side. Now, I do not have a good example of that because I just moved here and I have not put anything up. But you can show the personal side. We've met people's pets during COVID. We've met their kids. We've seen what's on their walls and at home, right, versus the office. So it's an opportunity to engage and get to know people on a more personal level. And it's probably here to stay in that regard. And then also for the people that are introverted, any introverts on the call, it equalizes participation somewhat. If you're afraid to interrupt in a live conversation, then you can put something into the group chat and still put your thoughts out there in a way that shows you're engaged, that shows you're plugged in and that you have value to add. So that's been another opportunity with the remote work. So I'm going to run through these. So what are the key things? Is to just clarify, reestablish the performance expectations, right? Sometimes managers, some of us are, they don't trust being people out of sight, out of mind. So what are the new performance expectations? We talked about being intentional. You're going to have to just reach out to people and set up those one-on-ones because you're not going to have the hallway. Now, if you're in a hybrid environment, then you're going to want to show up. But if you're not, another thing is frequent follow-ups, right? Over communicating. So letting people know what your process is before, during, and after. Again, it helps to build trust. It helps people be plugged in and aligned. So we're not disconnected. It's easy for sometimes two of us to be working on a similar project, but working towards different ends if we're not in conjunction. Volunteering for meetings, lead some of those meetings, whether they're virtual or in person for that matter. Again, it's a way to increase your influence. It's a way to remain plugged in. All right, and I mentioned about showing up. So if you would put in the chat, what are your favorite takeaways from today? Go ahead and just put that in. What's something perhaps that resonated with you, or something that you want to perhaps try out or consider exploring more? I know we're running low on time, so I'm going to move forward here. If you would like, I'm raffling off 3 copies of my book, where I talk about some politics and how to navigate the organization, the Pipe Dream, 7 Pipelines of Career Success. If you'd like to be considered for the raffle, then just send an email to support@mikegelman.com and put in CWS&HR raffle, and you'll be entered in there, and my assistant will kind of draw out 3 people. So if you do that in the next 24 hours, then we'll be able to notify people by end of tomorrow who the winners are. We'll mail that out to you. And then if you would like to, if you have further questions, I'm happy to make myself available. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn and connect with me on LinkedIn. or email me, or go to the website. There's a contact tab. Happy to answer some follow-up questions that you may have, and help you get some traction. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over. And if there's any questions, feel free to ask.
All right. Yeah. Why don't we go ahead and open the floor for questions? If you guys have any questions, go ahead and drop them in the chat box. I have a couple here to get us started. What if the CEO or business owner contributes to and or condones the dysfunctional behavior taking place?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Some of the options are, can you go what's the board of directors like? Is that a potential option? Second, you could, blow the whistle, right? I mean, there's some of those. But again, all of these can have implications for your career. Or in some cases, if it's really not a fit, right? I mean, if it's the CEO and nobody's pushing back, maybe it's just leaving the organization altogether, right? I don't encourage people to necessarily stick it out in an environment that's toxic for them. And what your threshold is and what you can handle is personal, right? So for everyone, it's going to be different on what they can tolerate and what resources might be available. Now, going to human resources, again, that could be effective depending on the HR department. That's a resource. Or you can reach out to like a CalWork Safety and HR, for example, that can advise on some other options as well. But those are just some initial thoughts. Any other questions?
Let's see here. What is the best way to approach a person who gets defensive or doesn't acknowledge the problem?
Yeah. Well, a big term you've been hearing nowadays is psychological safety. And while it might be counterintuitive, part of it, the reason why people are defensive is because they fear. Fear is at the root of defensiveness. And actually, fear is at the root of bullying and things of that nature too, counterintuitively. So by creating an environment that makes it safe for someone to share is really the first step before you get into the content of the conversation. And so part of that defensiveness is really kind of, understanding the person and maybe even making yourself vulnerable and saying, I know sometimes I've kind of done this thing, or sometimes I've struggled with this, right? If you're giving someone some constructive feedback, right, by normalizing things, again, trying to lower their guard, that's a first step. Usually we just kind of drive ourselves in without paying attention to ensuring that the person's going to even be receptive first. That's a first step, making sure that they're receptive. We don't have the time to go into other strategies today, but feel free to follow up with me if you have questions around that.
All right. Do we have any more questions? All right. What is the best way for us to reach you if we have follow-up questions or a situation we'd like help with?
Yeah. So LinkedIn is probably the best way or easiest way. Just connect with me there. Mention you were on this webinar, so I know who you are, and I don't decline it. Or put a note in the invitation. So that's probably the best way. Or mike@mikegelman.com, or you can reach out to your friends at CalWork Safety and HR, and they can reach out.
All right. Great. Well, thank you so much for sharing. Remember, if we didn't address your questions today, go ahead and reach out to us at info@calworksafetyhr.com. Don, do you have anything to say on next month's topic?
I just would say that the third Thursday of August, we're going to focus on violence in the workplace, Cal OSHA's proposal for violence prevention plans. I know it's in the news and we hear a lot about it, but we need to be aware that almost half of all workplace mass shooting events occur in a workplace. So it is an issue that employers need to be aware of and think of. Cindy Williams is going to lead that discussion with some help from some of her friends. And I think you'll find it helpful and timely.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again for joining us. Stay safe, healthy, and have a wonderful day.